forever. But you, O Lord, are on high forever. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Matt and Amy. Good evening, family. My name is Scott Jones. I love the wave. My name is Scott Jones. I'm the student team leader here. And we have so many of our former and current high school students in the choir that I just love watching them worship. Love you guys. I walked back in the green room a little bit ago, and they were playing Mario Kart on a Nintendo Switch down on the floor. And I thought, this feels like a very student-led night. Hey, tonight is on the Sabbath. Like Laura said, the 9th rhythm of our rhythm series. And I bet a lot of us have ideas of what the Sabbath is. I bet some of us even have practices of Sabbath being implemented in our lives. And some of us maybe not. I hope tonight is new in some way, or at the very least refreshing for you. The Sabbath is something that I don't do too great practicing. And as I was studying for this teaching, I was convicted at how beautiful it really is. So I want to prepare our hearts with a scripture that I think is important to start on. This isn't going to be on the screen. I'm just going to read this to you. This is in Matthew 5. This is the Sermon on the Mount. So the part of Matthew at the beginning where Jesus is giving his first big sermon. You might recognize the Beatitudes are at the beginning of this sermon. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek, etc. So in Matthew 5, Jesus is teaching, and he says, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and surpasses that of the teachers of the law, then you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. I recall just from growing up in church, I recall learning as a kid about the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And I recall that specifically regarding the Sabbath, that they seemed to get things wrong. I recall some conversations where Jesus is engaging them in correction as they're trying to call him out for working on the Sabbath or doing too many things or lifting his hands or lifting his feet or healing people. And I remember him correcting them. The Sabbath is not about what you cannot do, but rather the Sabbath is about what you can do in the kingdom of God. The Sabbath is for the Lord and our worship of him. So let's just remember before we go into the Sabbath teaching that some of us might have some preconceived ideas about the Sabbath, what we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath, what we need to abstain from or keep ourselves from, and some of us might have some ideas of the things that we should be doing on the Sabbath. And while actions and disciplines are great, this is a rhythm series. Tonight's not going to be on what you should or shouldn't do on the Sabbath. Because even the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, students of the word, were getting it wrong. We're getting it very wrong. Jesus had something else to say. Okay, so there's this picture that really doesn't have a whole lot of meaning other than I thought it showed a beautiful representation of the heavens. Because we're starting tonight at the very beginning where most teachings start in Genesis. And I have a little excerpt from a book that I was reading that Matt Naetzel gave me on the Sabbath. But before I read this excerpt, I want to remind you regarding creation, the creation story, the days were kind of split up into pairs, okay? So we had day 1 and day 4 that were linked together through the creation of light or the creation of stars, of luminaires. That's day 1 and day 4. Then we have day 2 and day 5 that were linked together by the creation of water and the beings in it. And then we have days 3 and 6 that are linked together through the creation of the soil, the earth, the dust, and the vegetation and the animals that ruled and reigned and lived on the earth. And then we have day 7, the odd-numbered day that sits by itself. Listen to this little passage from this book. I have my Pike Pass bill as my little stopper here. At the beginning, time was one. Time was eternal. But time divided, time eternal, would be unrelated to the world of space. So time was divided into 7 days and entered into an intimate relationship with the world of space. With every single day, another realm of things came into being, except for on the seventh day. The Sabbath was a lonely day. It may be compared to a king who had 7 sons. To 6 of those sons, he gave his wealth. But to the youngest son, the lonely son, he endowed him with nobility, with the prerogative of royalty. The 6 older sons who were commoners found their mates, but the noble last son remained without a mate. After the work of creation was completed, the 7th day pleaded, Master of the universe, all that thou hast created is in couples. To every day of the week thou gavest a mate, only I was left alone. And God answered, the community of Israel will be your mate. This is not the word of the Lord. This is a fictional story by a man named Abraham Joshua Heschel, who has written a lot of books, and he's a prominent Jewish figure in America. And this is his take, his fictional take on how the Sabbath came into being. These 6 sons of a king who were all given their wealth, and the final son who was given his royalty. Notice it wasn't the first son given the royalty, but the final one. Sounds like the Beatitudes, doesn't it? When Moses gave his people the 10 commandments, he said to them, remember the Sabbath day and sanctify it. That word sanctify in the Hebrew, that word means to consecrate. Specifically used many times in consecrating a woman, to betroth, to become married, to take a bride. So it's kind of like Israel's destiny. The destiny of God's people is to be the groom of this bride that is the Sabbath. As the other 6 sons or the other 6 days had a partner, the 7th day cried out, God, who is my partner? And he said, just like what happens with the bride, I've set you apart Sabbath day, and I've made you holy, and I've prepared you for my people. So let's go into a couple passages on the Sabbath to talk a little bit more specifically about what the Sabbath is, okay? Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3, if we start at the very beginning, yet again, it says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work that he had been doing, so on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. You know, 7th, that word 7 comes from a Hebrew root also meaning to be complete, to be full, to be finished. So at the very beginning, the creation of the Sabbath, it somehow has to do with completion. Not only in the completion of creation, in which God rested, but maybe also foreshadowing the completion that his son, that the Messiah would bring about for his people. At the very beginning, with the creation of the Sabbath, the 7th day at the end of the week, we see foreshadowing. We see little hints of God's character to finish what he started. How faithful he is. We also see that Adam was not commanded to abstain from work. When the Sabbath first began, when it first was consecrated, it was not about abstaining from work. No, God rested from his work as he pulled back and basked in the beauty and called the day holy. You know just as well as I that God does not need to rest. He does not get tired. And yet on that day, he found rest. He enjoyed rest by pulling back and honoring what was holy. Okay, let's move on to Exodus. So if we saw in Genesis that the Sabbath maybe has something to do with completion, also has something to do with holiness, and God rested on that day. Let's go into the book of Exodus, where we've kind of seen the Sabbath play out with God's people for a little while now. So at this point in Scripture, God's people have been led by Abraham through the Abrahamic covenant. They've become enslaved in Egypt. They've been freed from Egypt. And at this point, God's people have been told under that covenant, that Abrahamic covenant, that they will bless the entire world. That a family would come from Abraham, that family would become a nation, and that nation would bless the world, all peoples on earth. Whoever blessed it would be blessed, and whoever cursed that nation would be cursed. And then in Exodus, Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the law ushering in a new covenant, the Mosaic law. In Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. So this is where the abstination from work is commanded. We must abstain. This is not a day to do, to complete. This is a day for God to be set aside for holiness. Why? I think because if this is a day set aside for God's holiness, and this is not a day for our pride, and we are given ample opportunity to rule and reign in this world by our own power, by our own strength. We're commanded to it. We're commanded to work, right? But here we are commanded to abstain from work, thereby recognizing God as more powerful. Israel didn't do very good with it. They didn't do a very good job of abstaining from the work, at least in the proper way in their heart. They still were succumbed, overwhelmed by their pride continually. And we see through the story of the Old Testament, the people of God constantly walking away from his calling, constantly walking outside of the realm of his holiness and righteousness. One more passage in Isaiah, moving forward into the Old Testament, Isaiah 58, verse 13. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This is not a fast day. It's a feast day. This is not a day where we despise the things of our life. Not a day where we despise the things of the world, but it's a day where we delight. We don't despise the things of our life, but we delight in the Lord. The Sabbath day is not a day to reject everything we can possibly reject in our life so as to empty ourselves enough to be good for a day, to breathe for a day, to rest for a day. Yeah, we need the rest. We do. I'm always thinking about how convicted I am by my friends who have kids. I'm just a youth pastor who doesn't have any kids and still feels overwhelmed and tired all the time. I can imagine what it would be like to have children and have that entirely other weight of responsibility on my life. And yet I know that if I did, I would probably be able to do it. I probably would. I've seen a lot of you do it. We're tired. We need rest, but we can do a lot. The Sabbath is not a day for getting rid of all the things so we can breathe. The Sabbath is a day of feasting on the things of God, thereby being able to rest. I think, what is the Sabbath? It can be summed up best by just saying the Sabbath is holy. The Sabbath is holy. Genesis, the verse that we read, said that God blessed the seventh day and he made it holy. Exodus said, remember the seventh day by keeping it holy. The verse in Isaiah said 2 times the Lord's holy day So what if the Sabbath is not necessarily about our habits, but about his holiness? Isn't it interesting that when the Sabbath day was set aside in the story of creation, and when it was called holy, that means that time and space was the thing that was regarded as holy. That all these other days, all these things were created, things that we as image bearers are called to subdue and reign over and create with and work and toil with. I mean, the fact that I'm holding an iPad right now and we're sitting in this incredible room and we drove cars here is a result of us subduing the earth, ruling over the earth. And yet there's this one day a week that God has set aside time as holy. Interesting that time is the thing that we can't control, the thing that we can't manipulate, the thing we can't change. What if the Sabbath day is not just another day to by our own strength do or not do the things we should or shouldn't do, but what if the Sabbath day is this whole other thing? This time in the week that we pull ourselves back and recognize how powerless we are. For as much as we work, as much as we serve, as much as we create, as much as we toil, we do not have control because time is above us. Time God has set as holy. I want to talk about this idea of holiness for a second. That book that I just read, there's a couple quotes that I want to read to you from that book. When a day like Wednesday arrives, the hours are blank, and unless we lend significance to them, they remain without character. The hours of the seventh day are significant in themselves. Their significance and beauty do not depend on any work, on any profit or progress that we may achieve. They have the beauty of grandeur. This Sabbath is a sanctuary that we build. It's a sanctuary in time. These other days of the week, we lend significance to these days by doing exactly what God has told us to do. Behaving like him, creating and ruling and reigning, and glorifying him in it. And yet this last day, there's beauty of grandeur just in the significance of this day being set aside, that we would give time back to the Lord because it is something we cannot control. Great are the laws that govern the processes of nature, yet without holiness, there would be neither greatness nor nature. God gives us 6 days to just be like him and have our way in this world, glorifying him while we do it. And then asks us to recognize that without holiness, without his character, none of this would exist. None of this would be. There's this quote that stuck out to me. The ability to calm your soul and wait before God is one of the most difficult things in the Christian life. Our old nature is restless. The world around us is frantically in a hurry. But a restless heart usually leads to a reckless life. A restless heart usually leads to a reckless life. So if the Sabbath is about holiness, it's about setting aside this day, consecrating this day, that we would live this day completely in submission to God and trust of him, not by our own merit, even setting aside the things that we work and toil over to give him time and space with us. And how does this day become different than the rest of our lives? The rest of our lives that are often so restless and then leading to recklessness. I think it's about reverence. Because I think reverence leads to rest. We continue to fall into the pattern, just like the Israelite people, of restless behavior that leads to reckless living. And so how do we fix that? Not by forcing ourselves into rest, not by our own power just figuring out how to rest better, but by taking on a posture of reverence before the Lord, a reverence for his holiness, open-handed awe for who he is and what he's done, and then taking on his rest like a gift. Isaiah 61 tells us how to do this. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God. For he's clothed me with garments of salvation, and he's arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. As a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels, for as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seed to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations. Might I remind you for a moment of our identity as the bride of Christ? Might I just remind you of what he's done? Holiness is not something we achieve. It's not something we do, friends. Might I remind you that he has adorned us. He has made us beautiful. He has justified us by our faith only through his grace and sanctifies us, prepares us for the wedding feast. Not the wedding fast from the world, the wedding feast in his greatness. And also, I love the idea that we're not just the bride of Christ, but he's kind of through the Sabbath day allowed us to walk in his character of groom. He set aside the space and time in our lives, rhythmically, and set it aside for us as our bride, asking us to take it in, to welcome it, like a groom does his wife. You know, there's a Jewish song that is sung often at Seder dinner in preparation of the Passover. And that song welcomes in the bride by a man named Lecha Dodi in like the 15th century or something. He wrote this song, and the song has become a Jewish tradition. I'm going to read this song over us. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Observe and remember, in a single command, the one God announced to us. The Lord is one, and his name is one, for fame, for glory, and for praise. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Come, let us go meet the Sabbath. For it is a source of blessing. From the very beginning it was ordained, last in creation, but first in God's plan. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Shrine of the King, royal city, arise. Come forth from thy ruins. Long enough have you dwelt in the vale of tears. He will show you abundant mercy. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Are you hearing what's repeated? Shake off your dust, arise, put your glorious garments, my people, and pray. Be near to my soul and redeem it through the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Bestir yourself, for your light has come. Arise and shine, awake, awake, utter a song. The Lord's glory is revealed to you. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Be not ashamed, nor confounded. Why are you downcast? Why do you moan? The afflicted of my people will be sheltered within you. The city shall be rebuilt on its ancient site. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. Those who despoiled you shall become a spoil, and all who devour you shall be far away. Your God will rejoice over you as a bridegroom rejoices over his bride. So come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. You shall extend to the right and to the left, and you shall revere the Lord. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath. The congregation at this point in the song now turns, rises, rises from their seats and turns and faces the door as if to welcome the guest. So let's do that together. We're about to go back into worship. Let's stand. This is so funny and weird, I know. Will you turn and will you look at the door? Turn away from me. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. So as the congregation, the Jewish people would turn and look toward the door, they're welcoming in the Sabbath day. They're welcoming in this bride of holiness has been adorned for them. And this last phrase, this last verse says, come in peace, crown of God, come with joy and come with cheerfulness. Amidst the faithful of the chosen people, come, O bride, come, O bride. You can turn back and face me. Come, my friend, to meet the bride. Come, let us welcome the Sabbath. Let me pull up Isaiah 58 just one more time for you up on the screen. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight, if you call the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will call you to ride in triumph on the heights and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. To feast on the inheritance of our father Jacob, the forefather of our faith, who is known for his pride and his arrogance, who God told, I love you and will bless you, for you have wrestled with me. You will receive my grace and you will receive my mercy. And I encourage you, friends, to find good habits that you can do on the Sabbath, but not just good habits to rest. I encourage you with your roommates or your family or your friends to find habits that help you revere the Lord. Revere the Lord. That help you tangibly experience his holiness. It's just as God has adorned us as his bride to call us into himself and welcome us into his kingdom. He's asked us to adorn the Sabbath, to consecrate it as holy, to bring it near and to enjoy it. We're about to go into communion. You'll come get the elements as the song is playing. Feel free to sing in line if you want to. Come get the elements on your own and then hold them. And after like the third verse or something, I'm gonna lead us through taking the elements together, okay? As a call to worship together before we go into song, let's say this formation prayer together. God, we join with your church throughout history in studying rhythms that will help us live and love more like you. Help us, for we are prone to doing too little, withholding parts of ourselves from you. Father, expand our hearts. Help us, for we are prone to doing too much, trusting in our own accomplishments. Spirit, teach us to rest. Give us the patience and perseverance we need to trust